Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. And someone will say his career can never be saved. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage.
Welcome to Just Nicolas Cage, where I very slowly work my way through Nicolas Cage's filmography, and today I'm talking about the 2015 political drama, The Runner. In The Runner, Nicolas Cage plays a Louisiana congressman who's trying to help the community following the 2010 BP oil spill. And after making a speech that goes over well, he's also considering running for Senate. Well, that is until the public find out about his sex scandal, and now Nic Cage has to clean up his reputation as well as the oil. Fun fact, this is the first Nic Cage movie that came out after I started this project to review every Nic Cage movie. I uploaded my first Nic Cage review back in July 2015, and this movie came out in August 2015. I just thought that was worth pointing out, but it's probably only interesting to me. And speaking of things that aren't very interesting, let's talk about The Runner. You know, at first glance, I assumed that this movie was another Nic Cage action thriller. I mean, look at this poster. You've got a mildly confused looking Nicolas Cage standing in front of an oil rig that's exploding right behind him, which never happens in the movie. I mean, we do see news footage about the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the movie, but Nicolas Cage doesn't at any point do a cool guys don't look at explosions in front of it. But another reason why I thought this movie could have been an action thriller is because it's called The Runner. And Nic Cage does a lot of running in those seeking justice and stolen type movies. And to be fair, Nicolas Cage's character does do some running in The Runner. We often see him going out for runs. Or maybe jogging is the better word for what he's doing, but I suppose the jogger is not quite as catchy of a title. But the title The Runner is also a double meaning because Nicolas Cage's character is thinking about running for political candidacy as senator. And this movie is actually a political drama / character study movie. I feel like this movie was trying to go for a House of Cards kind of a vibe. I'll admit that I only ever saw a handful of episodes of that show. But as far as I recall, House of Cards was about a southern accented congressman making questionable choices with a wife that encourages him to claim in power. And that's kind of what The Runner is about too. But from what I remember, House of Cards had a bit of flair to it. I remember Kevin Spacey breaking the fourth wall and eating ribs and playing Killzone 3, but The Runner doesn't really have anything fun like that in it. In fact, it does have a very straightforward presentation to it, which is fine, but I think this movie can be a bit dull. How dull is it? Well, let's just say for a movie called The Runner, it's pretty slow. You like that one? I've got more. How dull is it? Well, let's just say for a movie involving the ocean, it's pretty dry. You want one more? I saved the best to last. How dull is it? Well, let's just say for a movie about an oil spill, it's not very slick. Although, to be honest, I thought the first act of this movie had some interesting things going on. Like seeing Nic Cage be the man of the people, and it's somewhat intriguing at first when the sex scandal initially gets brought up. And the last act of the movie proposes a somewhat interesting moral dilemma, and I'll get into that stuff in a bit. But the middle chunk of this movie really drags. The movie begins to get bogged down in this storyline about Cage doing pro bono legal work for fishing organizations. And we're treated to riveting conversations where Nic Cage tells a fisherman to file for Chapter 11 because it allows them to have assets evaluated in bankruptcy court. It's just a lot of uninteresting legalese that didn't really grab me. And when it's not that stuff, we get a romance subplot that didn't really interest me either. And that's why I think that the script of this movie really needed a bit of punching up. Like, I think someone like Aaron Sorkin could have really made the dialogue pop a bit more. Or maybe it needed some sort of flashy stylization to the presentation, like Lord of War or Thank You for Smoking. And saying that out loud, I realized that I sound like a kid who needs keys jiggling in front of me to keep me entertained. But the truth is, I did find my attention drifting during a big section of the story. And this is probably showing my ignorance, but I did find it kind of hard to follow some of the terminology used in this movie. Like, they keep on talking about something called boom supply and soft boom and hard boom, but I didn't know what that meant.
How you doing on boom supply?
Hard boom, we clean and reuse, so we're good there.
Morris, who do I need to call to get trucks bringing in soft boom every day?
I googled it, and apparently in this context a boom is a floating barrier thing that's used to absorb oil that's in water. But unless I missed it, they never really spell that out to the audience. They also keep on talking about something called GCCF.
That's how many people have filed with the GCCF.
But when I googled that, literally the only thing that came up was something called the Governing Council of the Cat Fancy. And I can only assume that that's not what Nicolas Cage is talking about here, but now I'm dying to know what the hell the Council of Cat Fancy is. I mean, that's gotta be the next movie Nicolas Cage stars in, right? I will say though that I did like the real life backdrop of the BP oil crisis that this movie uses. The story is set in the direct aftermath of the 2010 Deepwater Horizon disaster, which had only happened about 5 years prior to when this movie was made. And I think it's quite interesting having that context of recent history powering the narrative. Because even I remember seeing the news when that BP thing first happened. Although to be honest, I more so remember when South Park referenced it. But it was a big deal. Apparently that was the most devastating man-made environmental disaster in US history. And the movie does a fine job at showing the aftermath of the disaster. We see homeless people and the impact that it had on fishermen. And of course that also means that this is yet another Nicolas Cage movie that's set in New Orleans. And here we get that post-Katrina depiction of New Orleans, like in Bad Lieutenant, where we're seeing the rundown houses and the less glamorous side to the city. Although there is this part in the movie where Nic Cage fist bumps a guy who's wearing like a Bane mask in front of Willie's Chicken Shack, but I assume that that's just a normal occurrence in New Orleans. But I don't think that the movie utilizes the real-life disaster of the BP oil spill as well as it could have in the narrative. Part of me thinks that the only reason why the writer made Nicolas Cage's character anti-oil in the first place was so they could make this pretty good pun about offshore drilling when he gets caught cheating on his wife. Which leads me on to the sex scandal aspect of the film, which I think is a subject worth tackling in a movie. In the movie, Nicolas Cage's character's infidelity becomes public and it disrupts his potential run for Senate. And I found some interesting quotes from Nicolas Cage on the subject of politician sex scandals, where Nicolas Cage said, "I looked at pretty much every story that may come to mind about a politician on the rise who was stopped short or dragged down by personal flaws, and then it just became a media storm. I've noticed that with the advent of TMZ culture that what is selling now is personal flaws and gossip. So much so that that's even infiltrated the vanguard of commentary." And I pretty much agree with that statement. I mean, even relatively recently, as of me recording this, there was a political sex scandal in America, where Kristi Noem's husband was exposed for paying dominatrixes to encourage his bimbofication fetish. And I get that the hypocrisy and the schadenfreude is kind of fun, but at the same time I feel like it's weird that that's news, you know? This just in, breaking news, former Secretary of Homeland Security's husband likes to wear big fake tits. Okay, cool, but what's going on in Iran right now? And I think that that's something that this movie somewhat touches upon. It's like, okay, Cage is soft booming and hard booming with the black wife of a black fisherman, but I still don't think that affects his policies, you know? He's still a man who wants to put the oil companies in check, but nobody cares about that anymore because he's cheating on his wife. I kind of believe that as long as it's consensual and they're not breaking the law, then the sex lives of politicians aren't really our business. So I thought that was an interesting theme that the movie touched on. And then the movie kind of stops being about that until the third act, where we briefly hear about another politician getting cancelled. Which is that classic thing of the news cycle finding the next person to vilify, but it all feels very surface level here. And that's my biggest problem with this movie, in that it's trying to say something, but it never really goes far enough and it never brings anything new to the table in terms of discussion. And this whole movie is like somebody constantly telling me, "Hey, did you know that sex scandals are kind of superficial?" Yeah, I did know that. Okay, then did you know that some politicians compromise their morals? Yeah, tell me something I don't know. And the ending of the movie is very guilty of that. I won't fully unpack how this movie ends because I don't have much to say about it, but near the end of the movie there's a moral dilemma and it's clear that the movie's going to end in one of two ways. And credit to the movie, it goes for the more interesting one in terms of story and character arcs, but it presents something that could have been a good jumping off point for a bigger storyline, but then the movie's over. In fact, this whole movie feels like a middling pilot episode of a TV show. The movie ends and you go, not great, but I guess it could get better in episode 2, but this is all we got. So let's talk about the cast and characters, starting with my soft-booming senator played by Nicolas Cage. Yeah, I know he plays a congressman, not a senator, but I like the rhythm of what I said better. I saw an interview where Nicolas Cage said that he wanted to go back to a more quiet, internal, emotional style for this one. And I'd say that was the right decision. I don't think this is the kind of movie that calls for a Nicolas Cage loses his shit freakout. There's no real bells and whistles to his performance here, but he delivers the speeches well and nails the emotional moments when he needs to. Cage also goes for a southern accent here, and when I watched it, I thought, wow, this is one of the more convincing accents that I'd heard Nic Cage do.
But folks don't have a lot of room to wait around for checks to come, or I should say not to come, in the mail, and I want people to know I'm going to be there for them.
And then I looked up a few other reviews, including sister podcast of the show Cage Match, and those guys were all talking about how bad Cage's accent was in the movie. And I guess I'll take their word for it. I'm an Englishman. What do I know about a Louisiana accent? But if you're comparing Nicolas Cage's southern accents in movies, I think we can agree that it's at least better than his accent in Con Air and Ghost Rider. As for the rest of the cast, Connie Nielsen plays Nic Cage's wife, and initially it seems like she's going to be this ruthless Robin Wright from House of Cards or Lady Macbeth type character, where she's going to coerce her husband to get a promotion by any means necessary. And there's a little bit of that in the movie, but there's not nearly enough, which is a shame because I think they could have done a lot more with the character. Sarah Paulson plays Cage's political advisor, and halfway through the movie her and Nic Cage start sleeping together. Their sex scene kind of comes out of left field initially, and their romance is not particularly believable, but it would take a lot to convince me that Sarah Paulson and Nic Cage would ever hard boom each other. But they do have a bit of chemistry in a couple of moments, and Sarah Paulson is good here like she always is. Wendell Pierce plays Cage's character's campaign manager, and it is nice to see a little It Could Happen to You reunion for him and Nic Cage. But there's not much to the character, and I probably wouldn't even be bringing him up if he wasn't played by goddamn Bunk from The Wire. And speaking of actors that I mainly know from TV, the guy who plays Sal from Mad Men plays the sleazy lobbyist guy who works for the oil companies. His character is a bit of a cliche here. He's the smooth-talking, big-wig corporate guy, but the actor is pretty good in the role, and he has some decent moments towards the end, including the most badass line of the whole movie.
The only thing anyone is going to remember about you is that you fucked a fisherman's wife. Most people won't even remember that.
Goddamn, forget Sal, that's something Don Draper would say. And lastly, we have Peter Fonda as Nicolas Cage's father, who was to me by far the best part of this movie. He plays a former mayor who did a lot of good for the black population of the city and spoke out against discrimination in the late 60s. But he was also involved in a lot of controversies, although the movie only ever vaguely alludes to what he did.
They don't remember anything after that. The speeches I gave under the influence. That fucking spitting incident.
Okay, is anyone else dying to know what the spitting incident is? And the parallels between him and Nicolas Cage's character are pretty obvious. They're both politicians with good intentions that were hit by a scandal, but it's interesting that Cage sees himself as above Peter Fonda morally when they're actually pretty similar people. But Peter Fonda's performance is very good in this movie. There's a part with him in the hospital near the end where he's dying that was heartbreaking to watch, and Peter Fonda really gives this movie his all. And wait, I just realized that Nicolas Cage is playing the guy whose father is ill in a movie with Peter Fonda in it. If only there was some sort of extra-dimensional demon that Nic Cage could make a deal with. So overall, this movie is okay. In fact, it might be the most just okay Nic Cage movie I've reviewed so far. It's the kind of movie where there's not much to criticize about it, but when it ended I was like, well that movie was a movie I guess, alright, what else is going on? I mean, it has some interesting ideas and some not so interesting ideas, but the biggest problem is, like I said, this whole movie feels like it's building up and trying to make a statement, but at the end it just doesn't really have enough weight to it. I really wish it had a bit more meat on the bones, you know? I will say that the acting in this movie is above average across the board, but outside of that there's nothing that this movie excels at that would make me recommend it over the majority of Nicolas Cage's filmography. So while I don't think it's a bad movie, I just can't recommend anybody to go out of their way to watch The Runner because there's not much to it. And the bottom line is, I'm probably gonna forget about this movie the second I hit the old upload button on YouTube. So the next movie Nicolas Cage was in was Pay the Ghost, so until then, thanks for watching.